everybody, Don Zoldi here, and now today I'm your host of the Full Tilt podcast, Tech Industry Leadership Talks. And we're so excited to launch this platform. I wanted to give you just 2 seconds on why we created it. As most of you know, probably, I've been hosting the Dawn of Drones podcast. What you may not know is that every week we dial off from the public and we speak with our guests about life and leadership. And we tape those for our Patreon. And we had so many great nuggets of wisdom that we thought to ourselves, we need to make this its own podcast. And hence the Full Tilt was born. And so here we are today. And I can't even tell you how excited I am to have as our very first Tilt guest, Major General United States Air Force retired James Paz. There he is, waving hello. So
Hi,
General
everyone.
Paz is very special to me. Not only is he a mentor, but he was in large part the inspiration for me to create my company, P3 Tech Consulting, and has been helping me all along the way. So General Paz, thank you so much for being our first guest today.
Well, you're more than welcome. And it was, I'm not sure if it was helping or dragging you along, especially when you found out you had to use QuickBooks for everything.
I'm
Not my
just now,
favorite program, not yours, I know.
just for the record, I'm just starting to use QuickBooks a year and a half into my business. But Gerald, let's talk a little bit about your background
Sure.
to kind of set the stage for leadership that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, sure. So, Jim Poss 101 was retired from the Air Force in March of 2013 after 30 years to the day in the U.S. Air Force. When I retired, I was the senior career intelligence officer in the Air Force at the Pentagon. But gosh, I've been stationed all around the world, stationed in the UK twice, Germany 3 times. Saudi Arabia, I don't even want to think about how many times I've been there, but my background, I started out as what the Air Force calls a signals intelligence officer, and that's an intelligence officer that specializes in intercepting enemy communications to figure out what the bad guys are going to do. I flew in RC-135s for a good chunk of my career. Gosh, I guess I fought, if you count the Cold War, and I do count the Cold War, I fought in 4 wars. I was with the U.S. Army, 7th Corps for Desert Storm. I commanded an RC-135 squadron for the Kosovo Air War. And then my big claim to fame was I was the 3rd guy off the first plane to land in Saudi Arabia to take revenge for 9/11. And I was the Coalition Air Force's Chief of Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance when we first went into Afghanistan. So when I did get out in March, I cut a deal with Mississippi State University to move back to my hometown here in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and we were going to win Mississippi State the FAA's Drone Research Center of Excellence, which we did. So I founded ASSURE, the Alliance for System Safety of UAS Research Excellence. We beat MIT and Stanford somehow, but I ran that for about a year, and then I've been out consulting ever since. I try to work with commercial drones to do good things with drones to make up with all the people we killed over the years with them. But to be honest with you, most of my practice is military. But if you're commercial out there and you got a good idea, please give me a call. Well, so that's me in a nutshell.
Well, wow. And your company, you said idea, your company is called ISR Ideas. So for everybody, we'll have the website up there at the end. But so for everybody out there, what we're doing with this podcast is asking our guests to give us the topic, the theme, if you will, of leadership they want to discuss. And General Paz picked this topic of leadership in quote unquote complex technical environments. And so my first question to you then, General, is how do you define that? What is leadership in a complex technical environment?
Okay, well, I just made it up, and made it up after talking with a friend of mine, another fellow intelligence professional, about a problem we dealt with back in the mid-2000s, and this just got me thinking about all of the fantastically smart people that we had working for us in Air Force Intel, but the daunting complexity of everything that we dealt with just to figure out what was going on, just let alone figure out what to do with it. And so that got me thinking about how that applies to today's commercial drones, and the daunting amount of complexity that they bring to our national airspace system, and how the two kind of fit together. I mean, so it's basically, how to lead smart people in an incredibly complex environment, and get results.
Well, and it's not just in the national airspace. I mean, we've seen obviously increasing complexity on the battlefield with the introduction of commercial drones there as well, especially most recently in Ukraine. And maybe we'll squirrel on that, but let's kind of break down what you just said a little bit. You talked about leading smart people. So tell me kind of the challenges that you face in leading smart people in a complex technical environment.
Yeah, so I mean, I always start out with, believe it or not, I was a computer science major when I first showed up for ROTC. I lasted about 18 months until, and we used to do Fortran, and we'd have these cards, and I dropped the cards like 3 times in a row, and I figured, I'm never ever going to deal with a job that has got these damn cards, and if you drop them, you got to put them back in line again. So, I gave up on it, which turned out to be short-sighted at the time. But the Air Force, didn't let me go. So my first job was working with a system called DCSR, Display Control Storage Retrieval. And basically, it was a computer that had the power of, I'm going to go with an early 90s laptop. It took 17 C-141s to transport it, and basically all it could do was word processing. But even then, we had, some of the finest computer scientists and whatnot in the Air Force just to figure out how to do word processing. Well, fast forward, by the time I get to be a general, I can remember having a discussion with a friend of mine at the National Security Agency. We'd both gone through the dawn of the computer age together. And we kind of got talking about how, a single smart person could understand computers, everything you needed to know about computers up until, probably the late 90s. But now, it just takes a team of experts in various different aspects of computer technology just to figure out what's going on with computers. And keep in mind that if you're an intelligence officer, you generally have to figure everything out backwards. You have to see what the enemy's doing, observe their behavior, and then figure out what their motivation is and whatnot. And if you're an intelligence officer, you're also dealing with everything in a foreign language and a foreign culture. So you got layers upon layers of computer folks that you got to do to understand what the computers are doing. You've got layers of analysts that are experts in working things out backwards. You've got linguists. You've got, if you're going against a nuclear program, you got nuclear physicists. And that got me to think just, how difficult it was to get all of those folks, working together and doing something that they could all understand.
Well, how did you do that? I mean, you're talking about this technology that takes multiple people to use, and we're talking about really, as you said, the dawn of computers and how that evolved over time. Language, analysts, all kinds of folks, a diverse group of experts that you needed to bring together as a team. So tell us a little bit how what was the trick to leading these smart people?
Well, the thing to leading, smart people like you, Dawn, smart people won't do stupid things. And you've got to be able to motivate them by showing them what the big picture is, how they fit into what's going on, how fast they have to do things in order to have an impact with what's going on. And most importantly, and one of the most difficult things to get a smart person to accept is what is a tolerable level of risk of whatever they're doing. So, for example, and we can talk about this forever with, commercial drones and the FAA, but my example is I was chief of intelligence for Central Command Air Forces, and at the time we were enforcing the Southern No-Fly Zone. And there was an analyst at one of our space bases back in the States that had found a new way to use a new sensor that was just fantastic. It could detect what the enemy was doing, within seconds, and they could tell us, what was going on, 5 seconds afterwards. But we rarely, we knew something was happening down there, but we wouldn't see, the system telling us what was going on like we thought we did. So we sent a team back to talk with those guys, and we finally get the scientist and engineer that invented this and explained it to us. And oh my gosh, we were sort of understood it. Keep in mind I was a political science major, but he explained it in terms that we could understand. He was brilliant. He got it. He knew how quickly he had to do this. He knew that everything about the system. What he couldn't grasp was risk, because he worked in space and he was an engineer. And engineers always believe that they can engineer the perfect solution. And space guys are not satisfied unless it's 99.99999% sure. And he could only give us a 90% chance assurance of what he was saying was what was actually going on, which, for a combat intelligence officer or a fighter pilot, 90%, you never get 90% surety. But once we'd explained to him what the level of risk that we had here, everything started flowing, and we ended up reducing the overall risk to our pilots out there because we were able to take down enemy air defenses there. But brilliant guy, knew everything was going on, knew where he fit, very motivated, just had never had anybody set level of risk for him. And you run into that all the time with civil aviation authorities.
Well, I think a lot of career fields, General, have this risk aversion. I mean, heck, I'm a licensed attorney, as you know, and what I find also is so many attorneys, number one, they forget their place, which is just to kind of advise and recommend. Like,
Right.
they're not the decision makers oftentimes, right? It's the client that is. In your case, the chief intelligence officer or the commander. And the second idea is, this idea that it has to be perfect. Well, you're right. Oftentimes there's not a 100% certainty of a solution. And so, especially in, as you call it, the highly complex technical environment on the battlefield, or even in the commercial space, where time matters, being able to make those quick decisions and realizing, okay, there's got to be some acceptable level of risk here, and we all have to be okay with it. What is that level? I think that is critical. And I can really appreciate what you're saying about smart people have, especially engineers and even lawyers, have a hard time getting their brains around that. Let's talk a little bit about the cultural impacts of revolutionary technology and how you kind of alluded to it earlier with this idea of the advent of the computers and how that changed the game, and at least in your career field.
Right.
But in the commercial drones, in advanced air mobility, in technology in general, whether it's automated driving systems, unmanned, uncrewed underwater vehicles, 5G, Internet of Things. I mean, the list goes on and on and on right now with the speed at which technology is changing at such an incredible pace. How, when you throw this into the mix of leading people, how does this idea of revolutionary technology, how does that impact culture when you're trying to lead this kind of this team that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting, and a lot of it goes back to cultural acceptance of risk. And like I was going to say, the reason the Air Force is able to do what it does is because God made fighter pilots. And fighter pilots are used to making sure that whenever in that aircraft that everything's operating at 99.999% efficiency, and everything's functional and all that kind of stuff. But they'll take risks, and their goal is to achieve the mission. If that's to shoot down enemy aircraft, bomb a target, they'll take any level of risk to do that. It's it's amazing. I'm working with a company that deals with GPS reliability, and with civilians, gosh, you got to have up in the high 90s to do that. You get talking about trying to sell that to the Air Force, and you get them with a bunch of fighter pilots and say, well, we don't actually need GPS to do our mission, and we're not going to rely on GPS to do our mission because it's not reliable enough, so we're going to do this, boom. And they're absolutely right in both of their worlds, and when they say that. The problem you run into, particularly in unmanned systems, is you got a level of risk, and we can talk about that too. But unmanned systems are so threatening to so many aviation cultures on so many levels that it's difficult to get them to apply. So, kind of to get experts to accept them, and aviation experts to accept them. So we'll deal with the classic one that everybody knows about, that pilots hate drones because it's a jobs program. There's a lot to that. I think in the Air Force's case, not so much the Navy. The Air Force has come to grips with that, and they realize the advantages of unmanned systems. But in the early 2000s, when we were first dealing with these drones, it was threatening the pilots because they knew, 20, 30 years from now, it was going to cost, pilot jobs. Everything about the Air Force, deals with money and threat to the budget. And very quickly, our guys in the Pentagon saw that if drones were so effective, they would replace our manned aircraft and we'd lose F-35s or F-22s or whatnot. And then you have what the civilian world is dealing with is culturally, how does your safety folks, which, the Air Force will take a lot of risk, but they're not going to take it unless they have to. And the safety folks are the kings of the Air Force when it's not firing missiles or dropping bombs. And it was difficult to get them to take it. But once we saw how staggeringly effective they were, particularly in the counter-terror realm, and we got more and more of the Air Force's leadership exposed to the principles of how we were doing drones, a lot of that went away. To be honest with you, the Air Force didn't have a lot of choice in how much of its budget went to drones. In the 2000s, that was the President and Secretary of Defense doing that. I mean, it did cost us a lot of A-10s, F-16s, F-15s, and all that. The safety guys, believe it or not, the safety guys conquered the problem by being more safe, vice less safe. So the Air Force has different categories for who you have to brief and who gets in trouble when something happens. And basically, if you've got an attritable aircraft, which is what MQ-1s and 9s used to be, you crash one, you really don't have to tell anybody but the wing commander. Well, the safety guys decided, well, it's an aircraft, we're going to treat it like an aircraft. If you have crashed the aircraft, we're going to treat it like a manned aircraft. You got to brief all the way up to Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And that one change sent us from having the MQ-9 having an accident rate per hour about 9 times that of the F-16 and other single-engine aircraft to being roughly equivalent to that within about 2 years. So the Air Force, on the one hand, is not over yet, but it's a story of a culture being conquered and culture being understood when it comes to unmanned systems. Civil aviation, that's a whole other story, and we're not nearly advanced there, as advanced as the Air Force is, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you're really alluding to a lot of different things here when you're talking about leading in highly complex technical environments. So the challenges of leading smart people and having to kind of give them the big picture and get that buy-in essentially into the mission, whether it's military or civil. The fact that risk aversion is something that, especially with new technologies, always has to be taken into account when you're leading these folks in these kind of environments. And your wealth of experience, General, is just, incredible. So let's back up a second and kind of go to your origin story, because there's this like ongoing debate for all time. Is leadership a product of nature or nurture? And I have my own views on that. I'm not gonna. We can certainly get into it, but I'd love to talk a little bit about your background and your upbringing that kind of shaped your ability to lead in these highly complex technical environments. So let's talk maybe like from the beginning. So you mentioned you're in Mississippi now. Is that where you were brought up? And tell us a little bit about your upbringing that helped shape who you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an Air Force brat. My dad was a non-commissioned officer in the Air Force. Very proudly, he was largely in aircraft and vehicle maintenance. But I'm also Anglo-American. I was born in the UK, and if you're an expert in Suffolk, you'll know where Earl Soham is. It's population 3, I think. But my mother's a Londoner, and to be honest with you, the combination of the two had a profound, effect on me. I was just thinking about this the other day. It's been 2001 was 21 years ago for me, and a lot of that, in my mind is still real. You're going through all of the stuff that happened and all that. I forget when I was born in 1960 that my mother, who lived in the East End of London, had a roof blown off 3 times, and was only alive because she decided to iron one day in front of the front door, which was made out of thick oak, and that protected her when a German V-2 rocket landed across the street, killed
Oh my
a lot of
gosh.
people. My mother, World War II had only been ended for 15 years, when I got out. So I just imagine the reality of that. So unlike a lot of other kids out there, I grew up with the fact that, evil's real, the boogeyman is really out there, and they can come and get you, pretty easily. Meanwhile, being constantly exposed, to the wonders, my mother's a little bit one-sided when it comes to the Royal Air Force of all the technology that they used, and invented radar, invented chaff, invented jamming, story after story after story about brave airmen and the wonderful flying machines that really made an impact on me. My father, on the other hand, is from North Mississippi, and he's and it's pretty hard scrabble up there in North Mississippi. I mean, they didn't. My grandmother didn't get power until 1969, I think.
Wow.
So from what I get from him is, the world doesn't owe you air conditioning, and you got to go out there and you got to be tough, and you got to fight for everything you get. So I think different from a lot of other kids, growing up, I was kind of imbued with the need that you got to go out there and fight. And
Wow. And it's so interesting that your mom, even though your dad was in the Air Force, that your mom really helped shape your view of aviation and technology through all those stories and kind of her life experiences in the UK. So many people that we talk to, obviously their parents, or, the folks that raised them have really obviously shaped who they are today. And that sounds really powerful for you. Education, I think, is another place, whatever that journey was for people, oftentimes shapes their view of things. So tell us a little bit about your path first, and then I want to maybe get a little bit of advice from you to give to others about school and education. So let's talk about your path, because you said you were born in the UK, you were an Air Force brat, you moved around. So tell us a little bit about that. I know a little bit about that myself only through my own children and
Right.
them having to follow me around and move from school to school to school and the impact that had on them. But I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, growing up as an Air Force brat is, I see it more and more as I get older. You're used to moving, you're used to having, different sets of friends, you're used to losing complete contact, with kids that you grew up with and never coming around, and you end up being part of a very, very nuclear family. By the end, that your close family is the only thing that counts, and it's interesting seeing civilian friends that know their second and third cousins and spend time with them. Yeah, that's Air Force brats. You generally don't do that. But I was also the first one in my family to go to college. We didn't know anything about that. Didn't know how to apply. I grew up here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. This is an extremely water-centric culture down here. I was a big diver and spearfisherman and fisherman and all that. So basically, I figured I had to go to college. I knew I had to join the Air Force. So I just went to the college that was, would allow me to do the most fishing, which was University of Southern Mississippi, which turned out to be a great choice because it's close to Keesler Air Force Base, which is where the Air Force does all of its computer training, and they had a fantastic computer science program for the early '80s, which I took advantage of precisely for 18 months until apparently they progressed beyond those cards, but I didn't know that. It worked out really well. The other good thing about the Air Force, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, Dawn, is they just beat education into you. You're constantly going to training. You got to learn your basic job, then you got to learn your technical job, and then they're constantly making you do other types of education, squadron officer school to broaden your background, Air Command and Staff College. The Air Force will not promote you unless you've got a master's degree. So I have now ended up with two master's degrees. One I got when I was flying at Mildenhall in the late '80s from the University of Southern California, which was a great deal because they hired professors from Oxford and London School of Economics and Cambridge, and actually taught the school there at Cambridge. I got a degree from Southern Cal, but the professors were from all around the world there,
Wow.
which was just fantastic. And then I got another degree when I went to Navy Command and Staff College. And education is a frequent topic that I have with my younger airmen and officers out there. And young people always think they're completely and utterly busy, because they go from college or high school where you're sort of busy, and then you get into the Air Force and you think you're busy 24/10. I keep explaining to them that, hey, you can't keep up in a complex technical environment unless you get education. And B, it's not that if you don't have education, you're going to be that much stupider than your compatriots. It's just that they're going to have a degree and you're not going to have a degree. And in a lot of cases, that's just an open or shut case when it comes to promotion or getting a job out there. So I always tell them to start working on their next degree when they finish their last one, because you think you're busy now, wait until, fill in the blank. You're an operations officer, you're a squadron commander, or whatever. You just won't have time to do it then. So education is everything.
Well, it is. It is. And, so many people we talk to and so many leaders we see are lifelong learners. And, you mentioned we're talking about this highly complex technical environment, but you started off talking about the fact that it's about leading smart people. And at the end of the day, leadership is always about leading people. And so, the idea that getting technical training, that's good, that's important in a technical environment, but also kind of understanding the broader picture, the, liberal arts, the world around you, other cultures you mentioned, particularly with your background in intelligence and having to interpret information or signals that you were seeing. So along those lines, what book might you commend to people to kind of broaden their mindset? Not a technical book, but a book that you think speaks to this idea of kind of a bigger picture, I think were the words that you used.
It's going to be a nerdy answer.
Good.
And it's Graham Allison's Essence of Decision. He's just started a second edition, but Graham Allison took apart the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he broadens your perspective by narrowing it, if that makes sense. So most people think of countries as black boxes. The Russians made this decision and this is why they're going to do that, or the Americans did that. But he takes it apart and he really shows that the Cuban Missile Crisis was a series of errors and stuff that was done completely differently by people that may or may not have realized what they were doing. So, for example, the Soviet missile forces get caught, very quickly by U.S. Air Force reconnaissance because they just followed the book. So the book says that you have to put things out this far and this pump, and you dig them in this place, which made them dead easy, to get a hold of. When it came time for deciding what to do, President Kennedy very clearly took that team of experts approach that I advocate so highly. Where you had airmen, in there telling them that they needed to, bomb this into oblivion. You had soldiers telling them that, they thought they could invade. The Marines were with them. And then they ended up going with the Navy with, not too hot, not too cold, just right maritime blockade, which was the right thing to do. But Graham Allison did a good job of explaining all of the technical stuff that had to go together for any of those choices, and then how difficult it was for President Kennedy to understand when you're getting good, solid technical, advice from, very, very smart people, which one to go with. And, he made the right decision in going for the blockade. But it's a great book, and it'll broaden your perspective by getting you out of the idea that everything is so broad that countries, only make decisions in a black box and it's one guy making the decision, because that's not true.
Well, this is probably a great segue to talk about, obviously President Kennedy in that scenario had to lead, like you said, a team of experts, team of teams probably even. And so let's talk about maybe some tips you have for people that are in, obviously not such grave decision-making situations, but maybe a tip that you would give to, let's just say, a junior person, whether it's an enlisted person in the Air Force or the Marine Corps, or a brand new entrepreneur. Like what is a tip you would give them about their career?
I've already given the one, which is education is everything. So you've got to be a lifelong learner, and we've discussed that quite a bit. It's going to sound kind of cruel, but you got to find a way to make yourself useful. The world doesn't owe you a living. If you're just sitting around, painting rocks or whatever, we've got lots of people that can paint rocks. Make a difference. Do something useful. Do something that the world needs. And I would definitely put that in the context of a lot of the entrepreneurs that I deal with. You got to really sit back and and think about your idea that you have, not because it's your idea and you think it's cool. You've got to be cold, hard. You got to deal with others and make sure that you're solving a really good problem for someone else. You know, not an idea that thinks that makes you feel good about it. And it's the same way for, you know, our younger enlisted guys and NCOs and, you know, young lieutenants and all that. We got a lot of lieutenants out there. Don't take the route that a lot of people do, which is, you know, I got to go out and I got to be junior officer of the quarter or, you know, NCO of the year, that kind of stuff. You know, sometimes that does help, but what helps a heck of a lot more is being that one airman or lieutenant that you know, chief master sergeant or colonel is going to think of. You know, I need something done. I need boom, because you know, Johnson, she knows how to, you know, how to get things done. She's useful.
Right. So, I mean, I posited the question in terms of both commercial or civilian and military, because I think there's a lot of lessons that translate in both worlds. And I think you're a perfect example of that, General Poss, and what you've done in your career. And this idea of having a value proposition, I think I'm just like kind of summarizing what you just said. You know, don't be creating solutions in search of a problem. I just remember when I worked with General Mattis, like it was really, you know, everybody should know, like General or Mad Dog Mattis. He was the head of U.S. Central Command when I was in the legal office there. One of his many, you know, lawyers working with him. And I'll never forget what he said. It was so, well, he said so many things that were impactful. The guy is like the king of one-liners, right? But
Is
not in a, like, he just wisdom always just comes out of his mouth. And so one of the things he said was, spend 2 months formulating your problem statement, and you'll probably only need about 2 hours to formulate the solution. Because, you know, with just think about the highly complex technical environment working on CENTCOM, right, downrange, battlefield, all the different stakeholders. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here with you, General, but you know, that idea that you have to really understand the problem to be able to solve it, and then come up with a solution that, and especially in the civilian world too. How many times do we see companies creating something and it's just like, all right, that's cool, but what's your point? You know, so
right.
having that problem or the issue that you're trying to solve and marrying that with the solution that you've just generated, I think is really critical, and it applies in both contexts.
You see that a lot, particularly in the commercial drone era. It's kind of interesting because manned aviation, you know, was, you know, so well known. You know, we've had it for 100 years, and everybody knows the ins and outs. You know what you can and can't do with a Cessna, and you do know that if you're going to do something with a Cessna, you have to have a rated pilot. You have to comply with all the air traffic control instructions. You know, yada yada yada. Drones are so ubiquitous and so easy to use that anybody can use them, and the problem becomes, you know, the quote unquote experts, you know, the aviation folks are generally not the best people to ask what to do with a drone. What I'm finding is the most interesting things and the most useful things that are being done with drones are being done with non-aviation communities. So I'll give you an example. North Carolina Department of Transportation, you know, all great guys. You know, they're very few pilots and NC but they've come up with this brilliant idea of inspecting state highways and bridges by stationing drones every so often in boxes along the route of where they're going. And once a day, they take off and they get, you know, the greatest expert on concrete for bridges, you know, somewhere in Wilmington, North Carolina, and the picture gets pumped to her desk, and she gets to see how it's going every day. She doesn't have to schlep out there in an F-150 and look at it. And it's just, you know, fantastic that, you know, I, as an aviation guy, I never would have thought of doing that. You know, I'll you know, think about it using it to find artillery pieces or something like that. But the interesting thing where you have to have that team of experts is when I first heard the idea of a drone in the box out in the, you know, by some highway in North Carolina, you know, you almost faint because, oh my gosh, all right, so the pilot is completely remote from that. And that is beyond visual line of sight operations. It's along a highway, so there's going to be, you know, a lot of people there, a lot of moving cars. How do I translate that into something that the FAA will accept. And that's what the good people of North Carolina DOT are doing right now, is trying to take that good idea, which we know works from a technical aspects, which we know solves a great problem, but figuring out how to get the policy to catch up with it is, it turns out to be the big problem.
Yeah, and that's probably, so we were talking just now about maybe younger people, whether it's junior enlisted or very new entrepreneurs. Let's shift a little bit, because I think you've just maybe transitioned us to this idea of speak to the C-suite people, speak to the senior officers. You were a 2-star general. What is the best tip you can give them? You know, what is the recipe for success in leading these complex teams?
Yeah, well, I'll stick to the drone world. Um, I have very rarely found drone experts or aviation experts alone to be successful in this realm. I mean, I'll get a call from a young guy or gal that is a drone pilot, and hey, is anybody hiring drone pilots, and yada yada yada. That's difficult to find jobs for folks that are doing that, or folks that have a new drone that are going to do something or other, unless you pair it with a problem that needs to be solved. In North Carolina DOT's example, that was inspecting bridges and tunnels and whatnot. I'll give you a good example. Skydio is a company that I really watch. It's one of our blue UAS companies that are certified by the Defense Innovation Unit to have all of their components, the important components, made in the United States. And they originally, got their start competing for the Army's short-range reconnaissance program, which was something, to the United States Army's great credit, they did to help jumpstart the smaller commercial drone business in the United States due to excessive competition from communist Chinese drone manufacturers. But they started out with a system that was, just meant to, win the competition, and it was going to go, a mile or so and, talk with infantry guys. But they got in with civilian user groups and user groups in the military other than the infantry or security forces or whatever. And my gosh, they've got a great system now. This system can see 360 degrees around from it. It can stay exactly 1 meter from a wall. It can navigate by itself. Not because us in the aviation community thought that was a good idea, because, if you ask an aviation expert like me, I'd declare victory if they've got a good GPS signal and the data link is, reliable to 99.9% or something like that. Not realizing that we had to add on all this other functionality that you never would have gotten from a guy like me, but you would have gotten in a 10-minute conversation from an expert in civil engineering or package delivery or whatever.
So you're describing something that is near and dear to my heart, and you may not even realize that you're talking about, but you're really talking about diversity of thought. And
Right.
And the idea that you need different perspectives outside of your comfort zone, outside of your particular lane, especially as a senior leader, a C-suite person, a business owner, a
Exactly.
leader in the military, to be able to really succeed and have the best innovative ideas. And General, I think research bears this out. And, we're just talking about pure diversity of thought here. And that diversity of thought comes in all different kinds of flavors along the way. And we're not going to get into that, but we are getting
Very
crazily
Western
short on
perspective.
time.
Yeah.
Which I can't believe. I mean, obviously I can talk to you all day long, and there are times where I have, and we don't have that luxury here. So what I want to talk to you about, maybe a little bit of a lightning round in our last 6 minutes or
Sure.
so. Well, all right, before we get to the lightning round, this is important, and I want to talk to every leader about this, because it's something that I think most of us that are type A's, that have led in all different kinds, especially in highly complex technical environments that are very time consuming and stressful. I'm going to ask you this question, then we're going to go to our lightning round.
Sure.
Let's talk about balance, because that is something that I think is very hard to achieve, especially as a high performer or someone leading high performance teams in complex environments, technical or otherwise. So is there a secret? Is there a tip? Is there maybe a nugget of wisdom that you could give to others about trying to have some balance in your life as you're leading these teams?
Yeah, I'm probably a bad person to talk to because I don't think I've done well at that, to be honest with you, Don. Um, up
Well,
until,
thank you for admitting that, first of all,
yeah,
because
well, up
I
until
think
I
a
got
lot of
stationed.
people they delude themselves into thinking they have balance in their lives when maybe in fact they don't. And I honestly I think it speaks to your character and leadership to be able to recognize that in yourself. So knowing that, what do you wish you had done differently or would maybe suggest to others looking back
Yeah,
on
so
that
I think
topic?
I've done a better job with my kids. So first and foremost, I only did enough physical training to pass my Air Force, PT test every 6 months or, whatever, which, translated into running for about 2 weeks before the test. It wasn't until I got to the Pentagon that I just have, good Lord, I had to have some way to relieve stress. So I bought a crappy bike. I kept it at the Pentagon Athletic Club, and I rode around the Capitol every morning. And, I was the guy that had to brief the chief at 7 o'clock, so I got in at like 4 o'clock in the morning. So DC is magical at that time, and it relaxed me. It got me to do the proper PT. I got to, finally, working the weights and all that, and it really, changed my perspective. I mean, I was always kind of teasing the Army guys for doing PT all day, but they've got a point to it. And as a result, my kids all do, PT. I've made that a big thing for them. The problem you run into, particularly in the Air Force, is how do you take care of your family, in this kind of environment. I'm lucky. My wife was also an Air Force brat. The kids all, grew up in that, and it's kind of funny to see them grow up to see how comfortable they are, working in a life that's, doesn't have any certainties and all that. So I got one daughter as a paramedic in Austin. I got one son as an Army officer captain, and then I got another son that's a serial entrepreneur. So they're all used to dealing with diversity and all that. But I don't think I really cracked the code. I got lucky, family turned out okay, but it really wasn't from anything I'd been doing. If I thought through it again, I think I would have necked back on my own importance to the mission on numerous occasions.
I cannot agree more.
Yeah,
I
and
never made general officer. I was just a colonel. But looking back on my 25-year career, in uniform, the plays I missed or like shows to miss, like not because I was deployed, but because like I couldn't be that person that left
right,
the job to go to the kids thing. And gosh, I'm with you 100%. We have like 2 minutes left, General Poss, and man, we could talk about this all day long.
right.
So thank you for sharing these thoughts with us because people need to hear this and not take themselves seriously, but not too seriously because life is
Yeah,
important.
and it's not good for the organization if you're the only person that can do things and falls apart. I mean, particularly in military organization, you've always got to have backups and then backups to the backups, and it's good to put your backup in, and everybody needs to be able to function without you being there.
Well, and they watch you. They you can
Exactly.
tell them go out for lunch, take your leave, but if they see you sitting at the desk every day eating your sandwich and never taking a vacation, they will not feel like they can. So lead by example. Absolutely. I learned that lesson the hard way, which is a whole nother podcast and story. Maybe somebody will interview me someday, but let's do the lightning round. We've got about a minute left, real
Okay.
quick. Okay, so these are going to have to be kind of quick comments. And by the way, before we get to this, real quick, we've got a lot of folks jumping in the chat. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for dialing in. We've got Arlen Denny coming at us from Stuttgart. So thanks, Arlen. He's been out there, a
What's
real
good?
fan. Nelson Jose Salas Rivero saying hello from the GRU, the
I
Growth
think it's
Group and
pronounced
JetX
Stuttgart
team.
if you say it in a Stuttgart accent. So,
There you go. Carmesh says hello. Chris Wedgeworth, our buddy, always out there. He's at work listening. And Daniel Gagne from Volatus Aerospace, the chief storyteller, by
hey,
the
all
way,
right.
says exactly. Diversity of thought is so important. As a leader, it is also about knowing where your expertise ends, others begins, and how to build that team to fill these voids. So thank you, everybody, for your comments. All right, we're actually at time, but we're doing the lightning round. Let's go. We got about 10 seconds each.
All right.
Favorite boss and why?
My favorite boss, Ken Minahan. He was my second squadron commander. He ended up being commander of the National Security Agency. That is a guy that could deal with complexity. Great boss.
Okay, second favorite book.
Again, another nerdy answer. 1984 by George Orwell. I know it's a bit of a downer, but you know, I liked it, and it sure resembles modern life. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, sadly it does. Okay, next one. Your hero.
Winston Churchill. In my family, he's known as the other prominent Anglo-American.
There you go. And last thing to close this out, one thing you want to leave others with from a leadership perspective in closing that they should know.
Well, I'm going to go with what I tell my children. Never eat anything bigger than your head.
Bigger than your head.
And it also tells you not to bite off more than you can chew. So head size is a good mixture there. So.
I love it. That is great. Well, General Potts, thank you so much. I can't believe we're at time. We're actually just slightly over. This was really awesome. Thank you for being our first guest. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for the honor.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody out there, thank you for dialing in. Thank you for your comments. We really appreciate that. And we're going to roll a couple slides here as we close out. But just a reminder, tomorrow on the Donna Drones podcast, we have Aerium Analytics with their Rowbird. So check that out, 9 a.m. Mountain Time on Drone Life. And then next week on Full Crew, we have 2 additional amazing guests for news, right? Your news commentary with Savannah Haran, the senior robotics engineer at the Phoenix Group, and Jeremiah Karpowitz, the senior editor at Diversified Communication and Commercial UAV News. And then next Tuesday, same time but different place, join us on Twitter Spaces. We're going to have a full crew Twitter discussion with Ramon Roche from the Drone Code and Ed Bucas from Votix. So check it out. Thank you so much. We are out here. Have a great week.
Thanks a bunch.
We'll be right back.